So you're not in the United States. So tell everyone, before we dive into everything, tell everyone who you are, where you're from, what kind of content you make, those types of things.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jack. I'm from Ireland originally, actually, but I live in London in the UK. So I've been here 11 years and I do love it here. Obviously, it has its pros and cons, but I am gay. I've been out since I was 14. And I suppose I've been involved in the LGBTQ plus quote unquote community in various aspects. And I had a period of about 2 years where I got kind of quite far deep into more of the ideological stuff and a lot of the ideas which both of us speak about, which, now I believe are quite damaging. And it certainly affected my well-being quite badly. And I suppose I had a moment where I sort of peaked over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, where things started to not make sense anymore. And I realized that I'd been sold a lie on many things. So for some reason, I've always been a bit of a risk taker. And yeah, I felt compelled to speak out on all of it. And I started my YouTube channel, I think last August. I started speaking about this stuff. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. So I've been making content on LGBT issues, the community. I have a podcast called the Jack Jewel Podcast where I have both guests on, not just LGBT people, but also I talk about other political issues, mainly cultural stuff like Islam and race, lots of sort of topics that you shouldn't really be speaking about today, but I go for it anyway. And I'm very much on a learning journey with all of this and, constantly questioning my own assumptions and doing lots of research, consuming a lot of content myself. And it's been overall a really great experience. I think, it's kind of a side gig at the moment, but I feel super motivated by it. And although I have had challenges both online and in my personal life, I've made so many new connections, and this is another one here. So I've realized that the cost of speaking out is negligible in some senses because you have so much to gain. So yeah, I'm on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, so I can share with you guys if you want to check me out, maybe towards the end.
Oh, for sure. So, it's interesting you bring up your YouTube channel because that's where I actually found you.
Uh-huh.
I was just on my For You page, I guess you can say, and it was one of your videos speaking about pronouns and how it's an immediate swipe left if you see pronouns in someone's bio. And that's why I was like, wait, I need to find out who this guy is. And so that's when I was able to find your Instagram, and I was like, with it being Pride Month and all, we have to have a conversation a little bit since our content kind of overlaps a little bit. Now, you mentioned a lot already in your opening kind of statement here about the content you make, the backlash or things that you've had to endure. But what I want to start off with is what initially made you start making content that speaks out against the normative with the LGBT community?
Yeah, so it was a combination of my own experience being quite tough coming out of an ideology, and it felt, although it was a short period for me, just less than 2 years, it felt like I was coming out from a cult, and I saw the downstream effects of how that had affected my relationship, the way I moved in the world, seeing myself as a victim, my professional life, and there was there was a few sort of red pilling things that happened before this, but then that led me to discovering other content creators, like Blair White, Buck Angel, people like you, and I guess I've always really wanted to go into the content creation space, but there was nothing specifically until this point that I felt that is what I need to speak about, and I just had an urge to do it. So yeah, I just started. I feel like at the beginning I was a little bit more tame with my opinions, but then once I kind of got more comfortable, I don't really hold anything back now.
Once you become desensitized to what the internet can throw at you, you tend to just say, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to say it. I know everyone's thinking it, and I'm just going to say it. So, what has your journey been like thus far from the moment you started speaking out till now? You've mentioned some negative. Is there positive in there? What has this journey been like for you?
Yeah, I would say it's been incredible. I mean, for me, it never feels like work, and YouTube is the most time commitment you can put into a form of content creation, I think. So you're really in it for the long haul. And although I have a full-time job, whenever I have free time, I just can't wait to get back to, research, filming, editing. So that as a creative process for me has been amazing because I've both been learning new things, learning about myself, challenging my own assumptions, getting better at speaking to the camera, all that kind of stuff. So as a kind of vocation, that's been an incredible experience just as it stands. And then I guess the other positives are the slew of messages I get on a daily basis, both commenting on videos and emails, DMs, which I wasn't really expecting to get so soon. But it shows that even, I'm close to 5,000 subscribers, so still very small platform. But it goes to show that even with that, you can make a difference. And I think what really makes a difference for me is, especially when I get emails from gay men, but I also hear from trans people and lesbians and straight people who perhaps have had, someone they know kind of harmed by these ideas. But just them reaching out and saying, I'm so appreciative to have your voice. And at the moment, my friend group, I'm not able to speak out about how I feel. It's really tough. I know some people, I originally come from the musical theater industry, and that industry is very, very tough for anyone who does not subscribe to woke ideology, because you literally cannot say a thing, otherwise you will lose your job. So I know a few people still in that who, really struggle. So it's nice to be able to make a difference. And I hear from Irish people too, because, my home country has also become super woke. So I think that as well adds another element of kind of satisfaction for me, I guess. But as well as all those positives, I suppose negatives, I of course get online pushback, but I'm at a point in my life where I felt resilient to deal with that. It doesn't really bother me, to be honest. And I would say 95% of comments are just overwhelmingly positive. It's mainly TikTok that can get super heated,
Oh,
but
for sure.
I tend not to engage as much in that. And I actually feel like I reached a new milestone, because I had a woke YouTuber make a video about me last week, which was the first time that's happened. So I saw that as a win personally.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I may be reacting to it because their arguments were not very good in
You
my
have to
opinion.
share it. You have to share it with me so I can take a gander at it.
Totally.
Um, so we're getting to know you. So for me, I speak out against our community for the number one reason being I feel like there needs to be a big overhaul, a big reform for the ideologies and things that our community pushes. And for me, I struggle with people that advocate for gender inclusive restrooms, mandating, utilizing pronouns, changing the workforce for people to be required to refer to you as your pronouns. And then I look at things like drug addiction rates, mental health issues, all that seem to be slipping by people's eye because they're so focused on these ultra pulverizing topics that are good for views but don't really actually help our community. So what is your biggest issue with our community?
Gosh, one big issue. Um, I think it's the overall politicization of what it means to be same-sex attracted, because fundamentally this should just be an objective fact, and that's what our movement was always about. And I'm 30 years old, so I'm lucky enough to have grown up in a time where I did not have to personally fight for my rights, but I really appreciate that for all the gay people that did that before me. But the whole ethos of that movement was, we are this way, we can't change it, we just want to live our lives, and we don't want to encroach on your family, your beliefs. If you're a Christian, if you're religious and you don't agree with our way of life, that's fine, but as long as we can coexist together, then that's all good. And I think that was definitely the right approach. But now the whole thing has been politicized, And I do believe that there's several different factors coming at play, but obviously a very big one is gender ideology. And because gender ideology is not based in fact, and it is based on quite a frivolous set of ideas, which are kind of quite circular, and actively disencourage people towards questioning it, because even to question it means the arguments start falling apart. So it feeds into the overall political landscape in general we have of cancel culture. It's all come at a really bad time, because this transgender movement kind of has happened to spread with, you know, the medical industry, with the rise of social media, but then also the landscape of general woke ideology. It's kind of a recipe for disaster. And then you also have the commoditization of LGBT and how all of these companies are using it to their advantage. That's extremely disingenuous. But I do think that it's, you know, all of it is just harming the community so much in terms of how it makes us feel about ourselves and how society is starting to view us because of those things.
It's interesting because Pride. I was just talking about this with my friends, and you start noticing this like with the Pride parades and festivals that happen today. At least here in the United States, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you could go to Pride and pay $20 to get in, $15 to get in, because it was about community. It was about bringing people together. But now these tickets have gotten so expensive because you have celebrities coming in, you know, wanting to perform here and gain monetary, you know, stuff from our community. And it really makes me question, what is the purpose of Pride, and what has it become? And you kind of have to question it, considering the overall transition of the movement and how it's gone from just wanting acceptance to compliance. And so for me, I see a large amount of industry capitalizing on this month for their financial gain, and our community is just kind of slipping to the fault of that and taking it as, oh, they're being inclusive and supportive, when in reality they just see us for the monetary value that we bring for that month. So it brings me a lot of discouragement overall for our community, because I feel like Pride has truly lost its purpose and essence that it was supposed to be for. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, I mean, were the tickets you were talking about, is that just to get into the parade?
It was for like a festival, so they do the parade on the streets, which were free, and then they would have like a closed off, you know,
Yeah.
festival with music and stuff. It used to be
Mm,
like 15, $20 back when I was 20. You know, now I'm 32, and it's $100 to get into these things.
that is absolutely insane. I
Yeah.
think it's it's a real shame, because yes, you know, the commoditization of all of it is extremely disingenuous, and unfortunately, you know, we live in a capitalist society, which I ultimately believe in. But you know, we're seeing the same issues now in big business and, you know, mass corporations, that whenever there is an opportunity, people will make money off it. And when it is targeted at a vulnerable group of people who have a movement that's all about gaining rights and acceptance, then it exploits the very people that it claims to help. And we see this obviously with, you know, the transitioning of children and everything, which is just such a massive scandal. But I think your point on how expensive those tickets are and how this is distracting from the pertinent issues we should be speaking about, because in reality, Pride should be for, you know, a common conservative talking point I hear is, we don't need Pride, like no one cares that you're same-sex attracted, like no one cares who you sleep with. And I get that. There's an element of truth to that. But I think Pride should be in place for those people who grow up in families still that are not accepted. If they grow up in a Muslim family, for example, or even just a conservative family that are homophobic, where they suffer abuse, and these cases may not be very common, but they still exist, and we're missing those people. And if you're going to charge $100 to get into an event, some of those people may not even be able to access that. And there's so many issues permeating, you know, the gay community, very different ones for lesbians to gay men. Like you said, the drugs issue, gay men, we have all chem, sex. I don't know if I can say that here. And none of it's about that, you know? All of it is about just rainbows and wearing revealing clothing, being obsessed with your identity and being affirmed, and just this awful narcissistic toxic culture of needing to be celebrated by everyone, whereas I don't really need people to celebrate me, but I would like if we were able to raise issues on actual important things, but they are being missed, I think.
I think you raised a good point, especially for the woke side of this, is that there are parents and there are people out there that truly disagree with our community.
Yeah.
Now, I always tell people the only way to extinguish that, if entirely, is if we become like more like North Korea, where we mandate what people can feel, what they can say. And I think what our community really drops the ball in is becoming a resource to those parents and to our community that falls under that minute category of parents and family members that don't support you because we're too busy dealing with other things like pronouns and parades. So for me, if we were truly a community built on acceptance and love and providing what our community needs, I think in essence Pride would be very helpful. But as it stands right now, I don't see why anyone, if I put myself in the mind of parents that are like, you know what, I hate I'm trying not to I'm trying to watch my words. I hate homosexuality. My son will never be gay. Where do they go if their son or daughter comes out of the closet and says, this is who I am? Where do they go for those resources? Are they going to go to a Pride event and immerse themselves into the community and say, this is what my child wants to do? This is where they want to call their community? I feel like it does a huge disservice to that minority that truly, truly doesn't like us because of what they see. And so for me, yes, I do think if Pride was overhauled, it could be a great resource, especially if we were to focus things on the things that our community has actually fought for, providing education and resources to our community, such as like mental health care and avenues to be able to get things like your HIV medication that is low cost. I think when you go to these events, all of the things that are truly important to our community to help us are just thrown in the back burner for the overly sexualization of our community, for the partying, for the fun, for the drinking. And so for me, I do empathize. I do think Pride would be great in that regard. But as it stands right now, for me personally, I think eradicating it entirely is what's needed for an overhaul of our community. But it does do that disservice to those that do need some sort of resource. What are your thoughts about that statement?
Yeah. Well,
It's
I
okay
think
if we get controversial. It's okay if we disagree.
oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, you got to be prepared for that when you're so public about stuff, right?
Right.
Uh, it's difficult to answer because if I could have anything I wanted, I would want to keep Pride but make it very different. But I'm not sure I think it's beyond the point of return in that sense. I think the issue is that it's like the pharmaceutical industry. So you create a condition and then you create treatment and then you create jobs that provide that treatment. So even if the treatment wasn't really necessary, they now need to keep it alive because you have a whole industry and people being paid for this. So Pride is the same. Now you have all the companies benefiting from it. You have the major LGBT charities which are benefiting from it. And I really don't see that they're just going to pack it all in because some of us are upset about it. But I think maybe what we will see is an overhaul and a fight back against the movement from more of the LGB. Even that I'm concerned about though, because I find the content creation sometimes a bit of a lonely space in terms of an online perspective and situations like this are great because, we probably agree on most things. But I think particularly on Twitter, I get put in the sort of more gender critical box. But I'm finding a lot of those groups just as toxic in terms of how they hold you to accountable of your opinions. You need to toe the line. They do pylons. They use aggression as a means to state their case. So it's so tricky. I think the problem for me is calling it like the LGBT community, because we're same-sex attracted. There's people like us all over the world. We're not a community, but we should have LGBT resources and LGBT places to go to, like some bars and stuff like that. But I think it's just kind of trying to make it out that we're all the same is an issue. So it's very difficult for me to imagine what that would look like, and how I don't see it going anywhere personally. But we got to try.
Yeah, so when you think back to, Stonewall, where we were hiding who we are and making it to where, sorry, we have to get rid of the people that are just so loving, and just, love to give us beautiful comments of niceness. But when you think back to like Stonewall, where we first started trying to make a change within this world, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's important that it starts. And so what I'm starting to notice is, if people like you and I start speaking out and keep speaking out and don't cave to these erratic behaviors that come towards us to get us to silence ourselves, it really inspires more people to speak out. I speak to a ton of people in our community that don't agree with what is happening. And that's why I like doing street interviews and Pride, because when you get down in the belly of the beast, and like last year I debated whether or not we should be having the Pride flag in classrooms. And it was shocking to me how many people would agree with my perspective when you come at them with humility and openness and love and be from within the community versus, I don't know, the talking points that they like to use, like a straight heterosexual cisgendered man, where they automatically become defensive. So for me, it's so important that people like you and I speak out, because it really inspires other people to speak out, or at least support the work that we do. This way we can reach more people and hopefully change more minds. But it's a domino at a time. But in regards to like the infighting that happens with content creation, I think a lot of that happens with people's motives. So like for me, my motive is to overhaul the community, not to make money from doing this, not to become famous from doing this. It's really to, almost in a way, throw my hand on the sword so we can expose what's truly happening. And I don't make money from this. I just get the viewership, which I love, and being able to touch more minds and hearts. So that's really why I'm into it. That's what I've noticed within in the community of like-minded individuals like ourselves. If our motives are just not aligned, then we're going to have some friction. Some people
Yeah.
do this for the money, for the views, and for all of that. So for me, I just want people to understand that we don't all think the same. That's why it was important for me to try to get you on, because here in the United States, it's always like, oh, Frank, he's the one that just does this for the clicks, views, and likes. And it's like, no, there's millions of people like me from my community that think just like me. And so that's why speaking to more like-minded people is important to me. So my following understands what Pride looks like here in the United States. I understand it. I interview people. What's Pride like in London for you? Or is it as vulgar? Is it just as vulgar? Is it more? What is it like for Pride when you have these events?
Yeah. Well, you know what's crazy is that I've not been to the Pride Parade since 2018, and it's just been because every year I've happened to be on holiday or just not available. So it is actually next Saturday, and I'm actually planning on doing what you did and going to interview people.
Nice.
So I can't speak on it hugely, but I'm I've been quite involved in the community in general in terms of the London space and the London nightlife. I think from a sort of sexually provocative nature, I don't think the parade here is as bad as some cases in the US. I think we obviously see the worst examples. I wonder if in the US, if that if every parade is like that, or if it is just a select few. Do you know?
Yeah, so there's obviously, like, if you go to more like central United States, it's not as bad as like West Hollywood, Los Angeles, or like New York or Vegas, or even like San Francisco for that matter. So these areas that are ultra populated and neighborhoods for the most part can get pretty rowdy. With the things that they wear, the things that they do, the fetishes that they expose with children around. But if you go to like the outskirts of Louisiana, where their pride parade might be 200 people, it's going to be a little bit more conservative, and those are what our side or our opposition uses here in the United States. Is like, see, look at this is a pride parade that was completely fine, and it's like, well, look at what happened in San Francisco. like
Yeah.
so it's a spectrum. But when you get into like these major neighborhoods, it gets pretty rowdy. I just was at Los Angeles Pride, and people were half naked. You obviously had the leather people, cascading the entire street. And for me, I'm just like, these fetishes that are being displayed for the public to just view, and people have children there.
No.
It makes me wonder, like, what if your daughter was to ask you what that is? How do you explain it to her?
Yeah, and I think parents themselves are being gaslit into thinking, oh well, on this occasion I need to kind of be okay with this because these are gay people and they are very vulnerable, and this is their day to express themselves. So they are being forced to be okay with this, whereas you just always have to put it through the frame of, if this were straight men or if this were straight people, would it be okay? And if it's not, then it's also not for LGBT people. But I was with some friends last night, and they said it has got worse here. So I remember at the parade before, there was definitely floats of people with like whips, and even just going out to the general nightlife scene here, people tend to dress very revealingly. And in a nightclub setting where there's a certain theme and it is adults only, I'm totally fine with that. I've even partook in some of it before, but obviously in broad daylight it's not okay. And I think the community, it's making gay people lose sight of what is appropriate and not, because here at least, a lot of conversations I'd be in these queer circles, they are very pro overthrowing social norms and heteronormativity and being released of this straitjacket that they've been in their whole lives because they have to conform to a world that's not built for them. So what comes with that is questioning, oh, why can't we be more sexually provocative? Because that's just a social norm that we've been pushed into. And then they paint straight people in this kind of stick man box of, oh, you're straight, you like buy a house, you get married, you have a dog, like you barely have sex. Like it's, they kind of think of straight people as just plain and beige, and then their lives are interesting and full and colorful. Whereas in reality, a lot of them are people who don't have a stable job, take drugs on the weekends, have poor mental health, have really bad ability to maintain relationships, or even just date someone long term. A lot of loneliness. So it's all a recipe for disaster, I think. And it's a shame that people think in order for me to feel accepted, then I need to express my sexuality to this level in public, And I think, again, it's like doing gay people a disservice because I don't think it's ultimately good for them.
You raised some good points that's going to make me ask you just kind of a straightforward question.
Yeah.
Um, does gay privilege exist?
Uh, I think privilege as a concept I'm wary of, because then you start veering into the whole intersectionality idea, and I don't think it's helpful. However, I have noticed with myself, particularly since moving to the UK, in that my sexuality has been a bonus more often than not. I don't personally feel that in my adult life I've been denied any opportunity professionally, or financially, anything like that, because of my sexuality. And in actual fact, I know that I've been in situations where people have loved the fact that I am the gay guy getting the job, or being in a group of people in which there is no other gay guy. And in some cases, it's been sort of more genuine, and I get that they actually really appreciate me for who I am. And in some cases, it's been very surface level, and sort of I've felt like I'm being put into a tick box.
When you had talked about pride and making it to where if it's not okay for like a straight person to do it, we really shouldn't be doing it. And that's what raises the question, because I don't see events where heterosexual people are able to display fetishes and act them out in public. And so for me, it makes me question whether or not gays do have some sort of privilege in certain regards. Now, in my opinion, everyone has a privilege at some point, at somewhere in your life. And for me, I think when it comes to indecent exposure, gay people definitely have a carve out with that, where it's not as heavily prosecuted as it used to be. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And with every demographic, you have immutable things that privilege you, and then you have things that don't. So with gay people, I don't I don't know a single gay person personally who has not struggled with their mental health due to growing up in a world that was more difficult to navigate and not being able to hold down a stable relationship, feeling very lonely. So in that way, they're definitely underprivileged, and people don't talk about those issues. But then, absolutely, in terms of the climate we have with political correctness, and now the LGBT community in the West is a community that cannot be criticized in any regard. So you have to agree with 100% in the narrative. And unfortunately, then they go rogue. They can do whatever they like. And I think, particularly with men, you do see gay men getting away with more than perhaps women would. And I think there is an element of male privilege in that too.
Of course. So for me, it really raises the question in which what journey is our community taking at this time? Is it taking a journey that's actually benefiting us or not? So for me, I think right now when you say our community, when you paint it as LGBT, people automatically have to accept it, because if you don't accept it, then you become homophobic and transphobic, and no one wants to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
Especially now with how our country, mine over here, will prosecute you. They'll go after your job, they'll go after your livelihood, your reputation, anything. You know, if you even give us a small little inkling that you might be homophobic or transphobic. So that makes me question. It raises a question for me to you. Do you think that the LGB community needs to separate itself from the T community?
Yeah, I'm still on a journey with this because when I started making content, I was kind of vehemently no, and I had my reasons for that. However, so I guess one part of it is with trans people, and we probably won't go into all of this in this live, but there's obviously different reasons why people become trans and or start identifying as trans, and a common one is gay people who grew up who faced a lot of abuse or bullying, intolerance from their homosexuality. So separating it concerns me for those people because I think if they had been given another reality and another alternate universe in which they could grow up in a different circumstance, I think they could have ended up just healthy gay people. So I'm worried about leaving them by the waistline. However, then you have all the other reasons people identify as all of these different things, and some of them are, of a sexual nature. A lot of them are straight people who have no personality and say they're non-binary, which to me is very offensive. So I do think I'm open to the separation mainly because when it's all together, there's no such thing as a gay male event. There's no such thing as a lesbian event anymore. There's not a single event in London, like an official event, that is for gay men and only people born male. They're always open to trans men too. And it's an issue when you have particularly stuff like support groups for like addiction, HIV, those kind of things. They need to be, if it's for men, it needs to be for men, and if it's for women, it needs to be for women. But to deny people those opportunities because everything has to be inclusive, I think, is a major issue. And then it prevents us from speaking about issues, in the correct way, because a trans man's experience with essay, for example, will be very different to a gay male experience. But if they're put into the same support group, it doesn't work. So I'm conflicted, but I think in terms of getting together to celebrate and bars and clubs wanting to make it LGBT, I think as more of a libertarian mindset, they should have every right to do that. But other companies should also have a full right, free from judgment, of setting up spaces that are only for gays and lesbians, born male and female, for example, or only for gay men. And if we were allowed to do that, I think it would be easier for us to move forward in sort of a bit of a middle ground.
So that makes me want to ask this question. Do you think that the trans community is eradicating lesbians, gays, and bisexuals?
Um, I think that a lot of them are trying, and the ideology lends itself to doing so for sure, because they say that it's now same gender attraction. And I think particularly on dating apps and stuff like Grindr, where you're unable to filter out trans people, is a huge issue. And it's become everything that was for gay people has now become homophobic, and they're gaslighting us into thinking we should feel certain ways. And there obviously are cases of young gay men, young gay women who have gone home from someone from a club, slept with them, who are trans, and they've done it because they thought, oh, I probably should be okay with this. So it's really damaging, I think. So in some cases, it's overinflated because we see a lot of online crazy woke TikToks. And in my personal life, I don't have anyone challenging me on why are you not attracted to trans men. But I do think there's a big element of it for sure.
When I think about this situation that's transpiring, I have a huge issue with the trans community coming across as gender is how you identify. And when you start labeling things like, oh, it's just how you feel on the inside, that's a direct attack on LGBT people, because our attraction is literally built into people's body parts. And so when you start saying, someone with a vagina can be a man and also be gay, it really, really does destruction to, in my opinion, the community that paved the way, for people to be able to have the life that they have now. When you and I were growing up, especially those that came before us, there was a direct reason to have things like restrictions and policies and laws put in place to provide ourselves protections, because there was things that were transpiring. There were people that were targeting LGBT people specifically just on those actions. But because of the sacrifices that the people that come before us and ourselves, it really paved the way for the youth of today to live a life that was nothing like the 50s and the 40s for people like us. And so when people start implementing laws that would have helped us 30 years ago, today, to me, it's more showboating of politics than it really would help our community. And so for me, when I think of the LGBT community as a whole, I think it's important that we separate, specifically because they are extremely contradicting to one another. And I did not see a vast majority of people pushing for the youth to understand our community more so than I am today with the transgender movement. And for me, that's doing so much damage to our community and really, really setting us back as a movement
Uh-huh.
from all of the work that we did to get this far. When we first started out, they said that we would come for the kids. They would call us the P word. They would paint us in a way that truly, truly is scary. And then you flash forward 50 years, and now this curriculum is being transcended across all of our districts here in the United States and being required to be taught to kids. And so for me, it's really, really done a disservice where we're at today.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've been leaning more and more towards that it should be separated as time goes on. I just think especially, I mean, when you said, is it being a race, I didn't even go into the fact of all the gay kids who have been transitioned, and that is like literal, like physical erasure, from both the perspective of sterilizing them and also trying to change them into the other sex. So whenever I get doubts about speaking so publicly and opening myself up to risk, it always comes back to that for me, because for me to benefit from what all our predecessors did, and arguably right now in the West in 2024, it is the best time in history to be gay, right?
Right.
And I have a lot of people to thank for that. And, you know, I love reading novels. I read a lot of stories about gay relationships, you know, several decades ago or even longer. They're always very sad. And I like reading them because it reminds me of how grateful to feel and how my life could have been so different. And it's just a shame that now we sort of benefited from that for a very short space of time, and it's being ruined by all of this gender ideology. And it's not just tainting it, it's actually, like you said, erasing us. So it is a huge issue. And I feel personally scarred from all the ideas because, like you said, teaching them in school, you know, I feel ashamed to talk about it still, but I got involved in that kind of stuff from more professional context within my job, of kind of an extracurricular training course for colleagues and stuff like that. And there were lots of reasons I got into it, you know, the motivations behind wanting to be accepted by people because I wasn't really agreeing with the narrative as much. So that really harmed me, I think. And yeah, I think I think we're just doing a disservice. Well, not us, because we're obviously trying to fight against it, but it's doing. It must be so sad to be like 80 years old and see what's happening.
Yes, I would agree. You know, you see some of the older generation that was there in the early onset stages of our movement, and some of them are embracing what's going on today, but I like to think that the overwhelming majority, if they would have guessed what would have happened 50 years later, they would be jaw dropped to see what's transpiring now. So let me switch gears here a little bit into something that I'm advocating towards right now here in California. So they're putting up legislation here in California that would require our school districts to not notify parents if the child changes their gender identity. What are your thoughts about that?
It's just ludicrous. I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because in the UK, the exact opposite is happening here. In terms of the government, are they just released their preliminary guidance for schools, and one of the talking points was teachers are not allowed let their kids adopt pronouns without informing the parents, and that gender identity theory is also going to be banned from public education. So I do think actually in the UK we're ahead of you guys in certain regards, because then we've also banned puberty blockers for all minors. So I just think it's like to think there's a scenario where you can take parents' rights away in that sense is not okay. And we're not talking, obviously you take parents' rights away if there's evidence of actual abuse going on and removing kids from that situation. But a parent believing that someone can be like neither a man nor a woman, and they don't think that's maybe the best thing for their daughter or whatever, that's not abuse, you know? And I think even in the case of you have a family that don't agree with homosexuality, I think that's heartbreaking, and I would not want any kid to go through that. But I think when we start doing things behind parents' backs, it's a slippery slope, because any scenario which removes removes a parent from the equation and forms a secretive bond between an adult and a child, it leaves it vulnerable to exploitation, whether that's from the adult themselves or someone else that capitalizes on it. So I think for that reason, it's not possible to do that stuff. But it's just California's insane, like this kind of stuff. And don't you have that law where uh, haven't some kids been like separated from their parents because
Oh,
their
for
parents?
sure. You literally can come to California, flee your parents, become an award of the state here, and they will give you your transition hormones and get you on track, and all without your parents knowing. When you look at, California as being the hub of the booming that's going on with these children, it really, really scares me because when I talk to these politicians, especially in Sacramento or even out on the streets, it shocks me because it's a lot of heterosexual cisgendered people that are advocating for this. And I'm like, do you even go and actually talk to the people on the ground about what is really transpiring in my community? Or do you only just listen to the political groups that are there to help push the agenda for you? And a lot of it is that. The Trevor Project, which is a huge LGBT organization that has a lot of influence with our governing here, especially in California, help give guidance towards this legislation. And when I deep dived into the data that they used, they were using Facebook ads to collect this information. They weren't surveying children. They were surveying adults and asking them questions about their workplace. And I just thought in my head, how reliable is Facebook ad data? It has to be spot on genius data, apparently. But then why are you interviewing adults with jobs for legislation that's going to affect children? So for me, there's a lot of manipulation with the data that actually happens. And for me, it scares me because ultimately, when you separate a child from their parent and sever that bond, that child is going to go down a journey of higher mental health issues, drug addictions, unaliving rates, all because we cut the parents out. And so for me, what we know is having that supportive environment is important. When you have a family that doesn't accept their child for their gender or their sexual orientation, I think the school should provide resources to that family, provide education towards that family, and be a resource for that family and that child so everyone can be on the same page. I just think back to when I was a child, when I came out, if the school would have sent me home with a pamphlet and said, give this to your parents, give them all the information and the resources and phone numbers that can answer their questions, I feel like that would have been way more beneficial than what they're doing today by not telling our parents anything.
Mm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on the family because for some, it's quite clear to the child that it's safe to come out because, I don't know, it's openly talked about since they're at quite a young age. So I think when it comes to gay issues, I could see that working. When it comes to gender issues, it very much depends on what these resources are because if the
Yes.
are you need to affirm. If you don't, your child is a risk of unaliving. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but I'm like unequivocally against all child medical transition and social transition as well, because even that can set them on a path towards medicalization at the age of 18 when you're still extremely young. So I think if the resources were okay, let's get you some exploratory therapy to like see what's going on for you, see what else is happening in your life, and not telling the child no, like this is wrong, but also not telling them yes, just giving them the opportunity to express themselves, explore, probably discover that they might have autism or neurodivergency. So those kind of resources would be great. But yeah, I mean, I just don't understand how this legislation and stuff has come to pass in your country. I mean, the fact that you can separate a child from their parents because you won't believe that your daughter is a boy and you won't give them testosterone and remove a body part. It's like I'm watching a dystopian movie, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
this I can, we see movies and TV shows of past scandals like OxyContin or whatever. There's going to be movies made about this,
Oh, for
I
sure.
think.
This is in 20 years we're going to look back on this and we're really going to see the damage that was created. I think back to when I was a little boy and I used to wear my sister's Halloween outfits. I used to play with her dollhouse. I used to play princess. I put makeup on me and on my mom. But never once was I ever told that I might be a girl. Never once was I told to question my gender or question why I liked these things. But I was just let to live. You know, my parents didn't tell me, like, you can't do this or you can't do that. They just let me do whatever I wanted without there being so much pressure on that
Yeah.
child. And so for me, when you start allowing your child to play dress up, that's one thing. But when you start trying to swayed that child into thinking maybe you're not a boy, maybe you're a girl, maybe this is something you need to start thinking about, you're starting that journey of, like you said, that's going to eventually lead to some sort of medical transition, whether that be hormones, surgery, or even therapy. There's going to be some sort of medical intervention that happens, and that's the slippery slope for me. Because at the end of the day, children just want to have a good time. They just want to have fun. They just want to be kids. They should be kids. And so for me, just allowing them to do that in their innocent stages, they can get into everything else when they're older and adults because they have plenty of time for that. And I feel like they're robbing these children of this. So
Yeah.
before we kind of wrap up here and whatnot, I do have one more question. So I'm a huge proponent that we should ban pride flags out of classrooms. What are your thoughts about that?
So a few months ago, if you had asked me, I would have said no, but I think one small pride flag would be enough for me. I wouldn't go beyond that. However, I think that pride and the whole intersectionality theory, it's sort of only allowing certain types of kids to be celebrated now. And being gay can be difficult in terms of coming to terms with being different and whether you'll be able to have children, like all that kind of stuff growing up, and feeling isolated. But there's lots of other reasons kids struggle. Some kids come from abusive households, some kids have learning disabilities, the list goes on. So I think it is unfairly giving huge celebration to a certain group and then denying, if you're like a straight white boy from a working class background who does not have much money, has abusive parents, you're still viewed through the straight white lens. You're not seen beyond that. So I think for that reason I'm open to it. I don't know if I believe in like the government taking control of that power, but I think that schools should be guided to understand why it may not be beneficial and it's in their best interest to not do that. And yeah, I think the more you do it as well, the more you get straight kids identifying as different labels because they want to feel included in the rainbow.
So for me, when I think of the pride flag, when you have it displayed, it's really hard for me to understand how you would explain that to a child without it coming across as either inappropriate or booming. So, like, I ask this question often with people that advocate heavily. I call them rainbow huggers. That advocate heavily to have these flags to provide safe spaces for children. I always ask them, if I was 5, 6, or 7, and I asked you what that flag meant, what would you tell me? And when they say it represents love, inclusivity, and acceptance, and that's all it means, that's kind of falling under the category of booming, in my opinion, because there's a layer behind that of, yes, that is true, but it's for gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgender individuals. When you just label it inclusivity, love, and acceptance, what child wouldn't want to identify with the LGBTQ? What child wouldn't be like, oh, I want to be loving, I want to be accepted, I want to be open and inclusive, so of course I'm going to be a part of that community. To me, that's where it's rough. But if you even tell the child the truth of what the flag represents, then now that's an inappropriate conversation you're having
Yeah.
with a child. So for me, it's a slippery slope, and for me, it's safer to not have it in there. I think when we equipped our educators with the right resources to have these discussions with the child that incorporates their parent is where we're going to thrive the most. And so when we cut out the parents and keep it between a teacher and a student, there's endless possibilities of what's going to happen in that discussion without any oversight. And for me, there should be checks and balances incorporating that parent in there.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll just jump on that for one sec. I think the best way to normalize being gay is just to see it in normal contexts. So if during your school curriculum there was a story in which there happened to be a gay character, but it wasn't the focus of the story, it wasn't like this is this gay character and this gay experience. So if there was representation, just with the knowledge that some people marry a man, or like some people have two mothers, but it wasn't explicitly saying like this is what this is the flag, this is how it needs to be celebrated, I think that would normalize it. But instead we're making it extremely explicit, and some kids don't even want to be singled out. Like if you're a gay kid, maybe you don't want to be have the attention on you like that all the time. So I do agree with you. I think your points, yeah, they make a lot of sense.
it's interesting, as we discussed our community for the last hour, all the different facets in which we're going wrong. And so that leads me to the final question that I want to ask you. When a community can't accept any type of criticism, they would be considered a cult. Do you think that the LGBT community is a cult as it stands today?
I think it mimics lots of cult behaviors, in terms of love bombing, turning people away from their family, censorship, the list goes on. I think I'm not sure if there's like a very specific definition of what a cult is, because I know that we're more familiar with them in the context of perhaps people that even live in a certain location being part of the cult. But people say that Scientology is a cult, so I do believe that gender ideology has many cult aspects, for sure.
I I agree. I think our community is definitely treading the line right now of being a cult, and they're just a
As
couple drops of water from overflowing to that side. So, what are your final thoughts overall about our community before we let everyone know where to find you and your socials and stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I was a bit pessimistic at the start when I said that I'm not sure if Pride is going anywhere, because, if I really believed that, then why would I be doing what I'm doing? I think that I'm hopeful for the future, in which nothing lasts forever. And I think, unfortunately, and even with this, I hope I'm wrong, even though it's what I talk about. I think it's going to be an onslaught of um, people suing the medical industry for being harmed as children. And it's eventually going to become so overwhelming that, even the people that are running from this won't be able to avoid it anymore. I think a lot of people who say they're non-binary, that will become old and a thing of the past, and they'll probably be a bit embarrassed about it. And ultimately, I would love to build a new community, or not community, but a new way for gay people to move through the world, in which when we are discussed, it's on topics in relation to, our mental health and how specific issues impact gay people and lesbians compared to straight people, of which there are many. And also normalizing diversity of thought and diversity of political leanings. You can be conservative, you can be like a socialist economically, but you can still be gay and be friends and, go to a bar and have a good time. So for me, like, the future is diversity of thought. I would really love for that to be the ethos of the gay community. But it's difficult to get there when we're so prone to like tribal tribalistic nature, and a lot of gay people are vulnerable to that because they grew up not feeling as included. So yeah, I guess that's my final thoughts. Hopeful. I'll keep going. I'm sure you will too.
We have to. We went from a movement that had to be in the closet and be fearful of our lives to being able to now have companies celebrate us across the world. And that's a huge accomplishment. But we also need to understand that there's a time where the war is won, and we need to stop pushing and look inward to be able to fix ourselves and heal what I like to call the closet trauma that we all are dealing with because of the past of what we had to endure that is now such a minute. And so that's why I really appreciate people like you really speaking out in ways that it's comical. It shows that we're not all just with the whip. So I really appreciate it, Jack. Where can everyone find you on your social medias?
Yeah, so I'm on Jack X Jewel on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X, and I have a podcast, the Jack Jewel podcast, which is on YouTube, also Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So definitely go check that out. And yeah, I'd love to have you on, Frank, if you're up for it.
Oh, of course.
So we
Yeah,
can
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, just let me know. Hit me in the DMs. We can definitely schedule it. I appreciate you a lot, Jack, and what you're doing. We'll definitely have to have you back on here. So if
Love it.
anything comes up, you have me in the DMs. You can always reach out. Everyone in the comments, make sure you give this man a follow and support the work that he does. And so if you need anything at all, or if you have any questions, just let us know. Other than that,
Just
that
putting
is.
someone asked if I could put the name in
Oh, in the
the
chat? Oh,
yeah.
for sure.
So
I'll also pin it to the comments of this video because I'll let it post so it's not erased. And I'll make sure that I pin his information in the comments as well so you guys can easily find it. Well, Jack, thank you so much, and have a good evening over there. We're 8 hours ahead. 8 hours ahead of us,
yeah.
so hopefully the future is bright over there.
Yeah, well, thank you for. Well, I have a light, so thank you for making the time work. I know that maybe this wasn't the most optimum time for you to be doing a
Okay.
live, but yeah.
Well, Jack, you take care. Have a good rest of your evening. Okay. Much love.
Bye. So nice to meet you.
Pleasure.